Ferrari returns to Italy after a challenging start to the 2025 Formula One season, with the only positive aspect being the identification of the SF25 car's issues. The back-to-back race weekends in Australia and China are shaping the technical department's next moves, with a focus on the suspension mechanics. The Maranello team hopes to solve the problem by adjusting setup strategies and possibly updating some internal components, working between dynamic test benches and the simulator. The problem is therefore at the rear. There are few mitigating factors for the double disqualification of the Ferrari cars at the 5.45 1-kilometer Shanghai International Circuit last Sunday. The 1-kilogram underweight infraction on Charles Leclerc's car did not result from fuel consumption exceeding expectations, as FIA stewards weigh the cars after draining them of all liquids. In Lewis Hamilton's case, the floor wear exceeded the regulatory 1 millimeter limit. The only justification is that, unlike other top teams, Ferrari had not conducted full-fuel race simulations on Friday, leaving them with fewer data points on floor wear levels. This does not excuse the Maranello team's miscalculation, but the disqualification reinforces the suspicion that the SF25 struggles with ride height management. Concerns had already arisen at the Albert Park circuit in Australia when, in order to explain the performance drop from Friday's free practice sessions, it was suspected that the Ferrari engineers and technicians had to raise the car to prevent excessive floor wear. Charles Leclerc himself commented at the time that they had done the right thing and had to lose some performance. All signs point to a platform control issue, meaning difficulties in stabilizing ride heights and managing floor movements. Initially, this was thought to be linked to the new front suspension. However, as pointed out by various Italian news media outlets in recent days, the issue originates at the rear. Not coincidentally, in both China and Australia, Ferrari struggled in the final sectors, dominated by traction zones. Now the work focuses on dynamic test benches. Along with its customer team Haas, Ferrari is the only team using a pull rod rear suspension, whereas the competition opts for a push rod setup. However, the problem is not related to the choice between a pull rod or push rod layout, especially since Ferrari has not changed this from last season. Instead, the Maranello team has evolved but not revolutionized other aspects of the suspension, starting with the positioning of external arms and internal components. By adjusting the linkages and modifying the characteristics of springs and dampers, the way forces are transmitted and absorbed between the gearbox, suspension, and wheels has changed. The design of the rear end is always a matter of compromise between mechanical and aerodynamic behavior. The more one tries to reduce bulk to free up space in the diffuser and around the gearbox, the more challenging the task becomes. The stiffness of the suspension also depends on compliance, meaning the flexibility or, more precisely, the deformation of the suspension arms and the external structure of the transmission, to which all other elements are connected. Managing ride heights, therefore, ties together mechanics and aerodynamics. In Maranello, extensive work will be done on dynamic test benches, known to be sophisticated mobile platforms on which the car is placed and shaken by actuators capable of replicating circuit profiles and loads recorded on track. However, these tests do not allow for aerodynamic analysis, which is instead carried out in the wind tunnel, where the static model lacks suspension. The data collected in both environments will then be cross-referenced with track data to refine the virtual models in the simulator, which will be used to evaluate potential solutions. Mitigating floor wear without sacrificing performance is not an easy problem to solve, though not an impossible one. Raising the ride height even by just a few millimeters always results in a loss of aerodynamic load from the floor. Ground effect Formula One cars are extremely sensitive to such variations, with the challenge being who can run lower than the competition. The alternative is to stiffen the suspension to reduce and dampen vertical oscillations, limiting impacts with the ground. However, excessive stiffening creates issues over curbs and bumps and deprives the car of mechanical grip in slow corners. Stiffening only the rear axle, on the other hand, risks shifting the balance forward, causing instability and oversteer. Platform control is a 360-degree challenge, requiring a different setup compromise. In Maranello, adjustments to the torsion bar springs and dampers will be considered, refining setup strategies to stabilize ride height without excessively compromising other performance areas. If unsuccessful, the alternative would be to update, where possible, the internal mechanical components. The development carried out by Mercedes in 2024 is the best example of how certain suspension components can be replaced without redesigning the chassis and gearbox. If the solutions prove effective, Ferrari could finally lower the ride height, unlocking its aerodynamic potential and assessing the feasibility of a championship comeback. Otherwise, it would indicate an unsolvable structural issue for the 2025 Formula One season, forcing a shift of resources to the 2026 project. The start of 2025 Formula One campaign has been very difficult for Ferrari, which, after the debacle in Melbourne, leaves Shanghai with a resounding 0 in the points column. This time, overall performance was there to some extent, though clearly still not on McLaren's level, but the Maranello team pays the price for a double misjudgment, confirmed by the FIA's double disqualification following the usual post-race checks. Both Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton lose their respective 5th and 6th positions due to the conditions of their SF25 cars, found to be non-compliant with the sporting regulations. Charles Leclerc's car was deemed underweight by 1 kilogram compared to the required 800, while Lewis Hamilton's car showed excessive wear on the plank, the skid plate under the floor, measured at 8.5 millimeters against the minimum allowed threshold of 9. Sunday did not start in the best way, with a collision between the two drivers at turn 2 on the first lap. The contact between Hamilton's right rear and Leclerc's front wing cost the Monegasque his end plate, later estimated by the team to result in a 30-point loss of downforce. The damage did not have too many consequences, as Charles Leclerc managed to maintain a significantly better pace than his teammate in the first part of the race, enough for the team to swap their positions. From that point on, the downforce loss became an advantage on the straights, but a clear disadvantage in fast corners like turn 13, which leads onto the back straight. This explains Charles Leclerc's struggles when, after catching George Russell, he was never able to mount an attack for the third position occupied by the Briton at the time. Beyond that, Ferrari's strategy also deserves scrutiny. With Charles Leclerc, the team missed the opportunity to undercut the Mercedes driver, while on Lewis Hamilton's side, they opted for a two-stop strategy, the only top driver to do so. This resulted in losing position to Max Verstappen, a risk the engineers had anticipated, but they were later caught off guard by the Dutchman's pace. Instead of suffering from tire degradation, Max Verstappen maintained a consistent rhythm, allowing him to overtake Charles Leclerc and secure 4th place. Hindsight is always easy, but had the 7-time Formula One world champion stayed out, he might have at least delayed Max Verstappen's charge towards his teammate, potentially losing 5th place, but preserving 4th. These are all hypothetical discussions that, in light of the double disqualification, are ultimately irrelevant, yet still worth noting. Now an immediate reset is needed for Suzuka. Ferrari remains stuck at the 17 points earned in Melbourne a week ago, and now sits 61 points behind McLaren, the undisputed leader of the constructors' standings. However, closing the gap in the standings should be the least of Maranello's concerns right now. More than ever, they must understand their mistakes to prevent them from recurring. In 2 weeks, the team will head to Japan for the Suzuka race, a circuit that will reveal a lot, if not everything, about Ferrari's 2025 ambitions. Historically, the Japanese track is a crucial test for single-seaters, especially regarding aerodynamic efficiency. Unlocking the full potential of the SF25 will be essential, as Ferrari currently finds itself trailing not only Andrea Stella's team, but also Mercedes and Red Bull.